Hello, and welcome to this introduction to Age of Wonders 3. This video is going to contain an introduction to many of the different systems in the game, including general game concepts, including how you win and lose, units and movement, cities and buildings, what domain is and how it functions, spells and research, and finally some combat. Now, all of the systems that I'm going to talk about are fairly deep, and there's a lot to each one of them, so I'm not going to fully explain every single thing. I'm just going to go into the basics of each one and how to look at different things in that, so that as you play the game, you have a decent foundation from which to start, and you can learn the game as you progress. Because really, with as deep and complicated of a game as this is, it's not quite possible for someone to explain everything that it contains. And indeed, no one would want to watch a video that long. So, we're going to start with general concepts. In Age of Wonders 3, each person takes the role of a powerful leader, attempting to gain control over the map and defeat all of their foes. To do this, you're going to start with a small force and a small city, and from that small force and small city, you're going to attempt to take over neighboring cities, neighboring independents, build new cities of your own, and generally grow your empire in power and strength, recruiting more and more powerful units and researching more and more powerful spells, so that when you encounter your enemies, you're able to crush them into dirt and slay them permanently. Victory is only achieved when you have eliminated all opposition, that is, all other players have been permanently removed from the game. To kill a player, or to lose, that the player must have their leader slain and unable to return to the game. Now, each person begins with one leader unit on the field, and if that leader is ever killed in combat and can't return, you will lose. Leaders that are killed will respawn after 3 days, that is to say 3 turns, in their throne city. Now, most people will have, at the later parts of the game, several cities, but only one city can be designated as your throne city at one time. The throne city is the only place a leader can respawn at. If you have no throne city, your leader is unable to respawn and you lose the game. Therefore, if you have a throne city, you can play a little bit more aggressive with your leader, but you don't want to get your leader killed. If you do not have a throne city, you should play very, very safely with your leader, because if you don't have a throne city and your leader is slain, you lose the game no matter what. Even if you win the battle, as long as your leader is dead, you lose the game. So, if you have no throne city, be careful with your leader. So, how do we tell what our throne city is? Well, it'll have this little throne marker on it, next to it, when you zoom out on the main map. And yes, this is our map at the moment. We can only see a very small part of it because maps intrinsically have fog of war. We need to explore this before we know what's going on in these clouds. So, if you click on the city, you'll be able to say, it says Avernus, Throne of Galendil. Apparently I'm playing Galendil this game, so this is my throne city. You'll be able to tell it by looking here and going Throne City. So, that is generally how you win and how you lose. Don't get eliminated, eliminate everybody else. Other useful things, if you ever have questions, just go up to this top left button here, the Tome of Wonders, and you can click it and it'll give you an index of a whole bunch of different topics. There's a search bar. If you have something specific that you're like, I don't know what a dwarf forge priest does, you can type it in, you search for it, and you find the unit in question, and it'll give you information about it. So, if there's a concept you don't understand, go up to the Tome of Wonders in the top left. Also, the hotkey for it is F1. So that is an introduction to the basics. As with most turn-based strategy games, your units represent your armies. They're your ways of taking over new parts of the map, conquering more territory, and generally getting things done inside of the game. Units are generally produced from cities, although they can be rewards from quests or summoned through spells. You can acquire them in various ways, but your units will move around the map generally in stacks of 1 to 6. If you have less than 1 unit, then you have 0 units, and there is nothing there. Units can move from hex to hex, like this is a hex here, there's another hex here. The map is divided into hexes. In any one hex at one time, you can only have 6 units. You can never have more than 6 units in a stack. Although, if you're moving through allied stacks, you can have 6 units move through 6 units. For example, if this was 6 units here and I had 6 units here, I would be able to walk through it since I'm not ending where there are too many units. When one of your stacks moves onto an enemy stack, for example, if this cavalry rider right here, where the green lines are originating from, is the thing I have selected. If a unit attacks another stack, then all of the 6 adjacent hexes are pulled into that combat. So, for example, if I was going to attack this neutral hero at the moment, then everything here, 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 and here would be pulled into the combat. I'll show you this in a bit when I get to combat later, but in general you have stacks of up to 6 units. So your strongest army will be 6 powerful units at a time, and unlike some games like Heroes of Might and Magic, your units do not scale infinitely up. You don't get to have 100 Pegasus Riders and 300 archers and 400 pikemen in one army. You have one horseman and 1 archer and 1 pikeman and 1 other dude. So there are stack size limitations, and they limit how powerful armies can be in combat. So when you're moving around the map, what do you want to know? Well, you see the green lines that are emanating from whichever army I've selected. That shows the path that your unit will take when you're moving. Units move each hex, and it detracts from their movement score the amount of movement points that they get each round. Cavalry, like the leader that I have here, or this unicorn rider, will have higher amounts of movement points, for example 36 here, compared to infantry, like this High Elf Initiate, only has 28 movement points, meaning that your unicorn rider will be able to move a good 2-3 more spaces than a infantry every turn. So movement, each space takes a certain amount of movement points to cross. Forests or dense vegetation take a lot more movement points than roads to move across. So there are roads here, it'll take me 3 movement per hex that I move across, whereas these forests take 6 movement, or these mountains over here take 14 movement to cross. Water you can cross only with a special technology. So if I was going to move this unicorn rider, I would be able to go 3, 6. I start with 30 movement points, so going here shouldn't put me at 30 movement points. I go here by right-clicking, and I have 30 movement points left. Now, if you have a larger stack, like this one right here, and you want to move some units but not others, you can control which units are moving by clicking on their movement bars up at the top of the screen. So any of the red ones are things that are not moving. So if, for instance, I only want to move my leader and 1 of the initiates, I click here so that these 2 are redded out and these 2 are green, and then I will move here and only 2 of my guys will have left the stack. And I have the 2 units I moved with less movement points, and the 2 units I left behind with more movement points. Now, you can recombine them whenever you feel like it, as long as you have enough movement points to reach it, and you can split up as much as you feel like doing so. However, if you split up too much, this leads to individual units being able to be picked off by enemies moving around the map. So, once you've gotten down to this, my stack right now, I have 3 units that have 0 movement points left, so I cannot move any more distance. You'll see all of the distance is red. That means I can't move anymore. However, if I was only trying to move with just my leader, since he has movement points left, I can move up to 2 more squares. And now, since you'll see the only unit I have selected to move is the leader, I can still move 2 more squares. So I could do that. This is generally not a wise thing to do, because even though you're being more efficient and using all of your movement points, having a isolated unit is a very good way to get it picked off by enemies. Now, on turn 1 of the game, I'm unlikely to have that happen, but it's still a concern that you need to be aware of. Collapsing my units together, I will bring everything together and then pass the turn so that we refresh our movement points. Each unit has their individual amount of movement points, and at the end of each turn, then you will refresh your movement points to maximum. So I ended a turn, and now my units are back at 36 movement points. To look at what a unit has, you can select the army, and then click on the portraits of any of those specific units to see exactly what its statistics are. You can also mouse over it to get a quick impression of what its skills and abilities are and how tough it is. Here you can tell what the name of the unit is, how powerful it is, and what race it is, what kind of unit it is, what its rank is, and its morale, and its main statistics and combat abilities. To left click and see the full unit details, you can see, aha, we have our High Elf Initiates. So, the different parts of a unit. You have the name of the unit, which is useful to know, oh, it's an initiate, you know. A lot of initiates of one kind are similar to initiates of another. You see its experience, you see its tier and upkeep, morale, and abilities. So, what is tier? Well, the lower the tier of unit is, the weaker it is. Higher tier units correlate to more powerful monsters and creatures. So, basic infantry and pikemen are tier 1 units. Cavalry, spellcasters, more powerful support units, tier 2. Tier 3 are powerful racial units and powerful class units, like the High Elf Pegasus Rider or the Tigran Sphinx, are tier 3 units. Tier 4 units are only the most powerful units in the game. They're quite rare and difficult to acquire, but they are extremely potent. For example, Fire Giants and Ice Giants, Golden Dragons, and Dread Reapers are all examples of tier 4 units. Lower tier units are able to compete and do things against the higher tier units, but a higher tier unit properly supported will be able to lane up many times its weight in lower tier units. Swarming tactics do work in the game, so a swarm of 6 level 1 units could quite handily take out a level 4 unit. But if you have a level 4 unit supported by just a couple level 1 units, it's going to do way more than its weight, taking out the enemy lower tier units. But it is possible to swarm down the more powerful things in the game. So, that is a discussion on tiers. Upkeep. Every unit you have on the map will require an upkeep of some sort. Troops, units that you've produced and recruited, will generally require gold. Gold is used for building buildings and recruiting new soldiers, as well as upkeep. Some units, mostly summoned units, will have an upkeep of mana. Mana is the other primary resource in this game, and it's used mostly for spells. So if you're using a bunch of magic to summon elementals into the world, they will require an upkeep of mana instead of gold. If you are unable to pay the upkeep, then bad things happen and your units will quickly desert you. Experience. Each unit can gain experience and level up. Experience is acquired during combats, and the more experience a unit gets, the more powerful it will become. These units start as recruits with no experience, but as they level up, for example, this recruit will gain a level after 10 experience. It will become a trooper and gain additional hit points and melee strength. The specific bonuses that you gain per level are completely dependent on what kind of unit it is, but in general, you're going to get more hit points and more damage and more toughness. Gaining experience on all of your units is good. Morale is tricky to determine exactly how it will affect you. You have a global morale modifier for your empire, depending on what kinds of effects may have happened to you recently. So, for example, if you've recruited a hero and won several battles and your empire is rich, you will have a high... your empire will be happy and all of your units will get a morale bonus. If your leader has been slain, your heroes have been slain, and you have not conquered any cities, but you've lost cities, your your empire morale is not going to be very good. On top of this base morale for your empire is the individual unit morale, which depends on some temporary effects, like curses can lower it. The kind of terrain that they're in can lower it. For example, these high elves are like being in dense vegetation, but really hate being in blighted or volcanic areas. So if I'm fighting with high elf troops in a volcanic area, they're going to be very low morale. If you've won several combats in a row, that can increase your morale. There are a whole bunch of different ways that morale can influence and change. In general, the higher morale you have, the happier you are. Pun not intended. High morale means that your units will have a higher chance of critting enemy units, doing significant extra damage. Low morale, they will fumble and do significantly impaired damage. And sometimes your units will desert if you have too low of a morale. So, now that that's out of the way, hit points, movement, resistance, and defense are the combat stats that we're going to be thinking about for the most part. Hit points are fairly obvious. When a unit has 0 hit points left, it's dead. Don't let your units get to 0 hit points, because you want to keep them alive as long as possible. Movement points represent both how far it can move on the world map and how far it can move in combat. Cavalry move around faster on the combat map than they do on the world map. Cavalry move faster on the combat map just as they do on the world map compared to, say, infantry. Defense is determining how well your unit is protected against physical damage, while resistance is determining how well it resists non-physical damage, like lightning, fire, or cold, spirit damage. In addition to these, you have your different kinds of attacks that you'll see up here at the top, and then all of these different traits that it has for being some kind of thing or other. These traits you don't really need to pay attention to right as you're a beginner. The more important things are these stats up here and its special abilities, but a lot of the more powerful units get fancy special abilities that do make a big difference. So if you have the time and patience to read them, you might find out very important abilities. But for the most part, your skill summary up here is what you need to know. So that is a primer on units and how to move them around the map, which, again, is right-clicking if you're curious. Right-clicking is generally going to move things, left-clicking will select them. And we'll be back talking about cities
In the game, cities are your primary means of generating revenue and creating new armies. They are most aptly compared to cities from Alpha Centauri. Your city has a domain. It can harvest resources from things inside of that domain. As it grows in size, it generates more production per turn, more resources per turn, and generally gives you better. The cities themselves can be used to build units or upgrade the cities by building facilities, or in this case, structures and upgrades, to make the city better in the long run. So, if you click on your city, you will see a whole bunch of different stats that it has. So, here you can see what kind of city it is. So, it says High Elf City here. I'm using city a little bit too much because I really mean it to say... So, there are sizes to a city, and city is one of the sizes for cities. I guess I'm trying to figure out a good term that doesn't use city, but It starts at outpost and then grows into a village and then a town and then a city and then a metropolis. So city is a large version of them, but anyways, they all follow the same general idea. So each city, or whatever you have, call it, has a population, and you, mousing up here, you see what my current population is and how much population I gain per turn, and then it also says how much population is needed to grow. So like in Alpha Centauri, you need a certain amount to get more people, you need a certain amount for your city to grow bigger, and you get that each turn based on what's in the city and what you have. Other things is you can see the gold income, the mana income, the knowledge income, and your production income. And if you mouse over each one, you see why you are getting that value. So I'm getting 69 gold from the city because at base it gives me 30 because it's large, and then it gives me plus 10 because I have a gold mine inside of it, and then it gives me plus 6 because it's happy, and then because of what it's building, which is produce merchandise, it gives me plus 23. So how do we know what is going to be in our city? Well, depending on the city size, the larger the city, the larger its domain. The domain is this big, large, rectangular border here. The larger, each time a city grows, it pushes its domain out 1 square, and then encompasses everything inside of that domain, and can then draw from it. So, things inside of your border will give you income to that city. For example, I have this great farm here, and because I have a great farm inside of border of my city, it gives my city plus 100 population per turn. I also have a mana node, which gives me plus 10 mana per turn because it's inside the border of my city, a gold mine, which gives me plus 10 gold per turn, and an ancient ruin, which gives me plus 10 research or knowledge per turn. You can also have more fancy things like this flow rock quarry gives plus 20%, plus 20 production per turn if it's inside the border of the city. Note, structures will only give you resources if they are explored. So if you mouse over this, you see Great Farm explored. That basically means that it's been conquered and that there's nothing there other than the structure itself. If you look at this, well, in this flow rock quarry, there's an army of independents, and it's unexplored. If my city were to grow right now, and its border were including this, I would get no income from it until I went and attacked this army and conquered it, so that I explored the quarry, and then I'd be able to get resources from it. Similar to mines in Heroes of Might and Magic 6, mines are inside of a domain of a city, and they give that city income, but you only get that income if they've already been conquered. You have to conquer them before you get the income. Even if you conquer something, like if I was going to conquer this gold mine right now, I would not get any income from it on future turns until it was inside of the domain of one of my cities. The domain of the cities marks the borders of what you are collecting. You can increase the domain of your cities by either building structures that increase domain, like stone walls or observatories, casting various spells, having the city grow, or you can build new cities with a certain kind of unit, which I will mention in a second. And you can also build, what do you call them? They're like strongholds. They're like cities that aren't actually cities, that just claim small amounts of domain. Their name is fortresses. So, building new cities, I will briefly go on this tangent, and building new cities and affecting the map. Settlers are units that you can build if you have a builder's hall, which is a kind of upgrade that your city can get, a kind of base facility. And it unlocks a couple units, the settler and the builder, which I am going on a tangent about. Settlers allow you to build, you can use them, move them somewhere, and build a new city. They are almost exactly like colony pods. they are colony pods, essentially. They cost population from your main city. They cost some time to build. You go, you build them, they destroy themselves by turning into a new town. Settlers are colony pods. You need to have a builder's hall to build them. Note that this is a much more faster paced game than Alpha Centauri, so having lots of colony pods at the start isn't necessarily what you want to do. You might want to build a colony pod here and there, but it's definitely nowhere near the amount that you want to do in Alpha Centauri, especially since there already exist other cities on the map other than your starting city and your opponent's starting cities that you can use. The builder is kind of like a terraformer. It has build roads, build watchtowers, and build fortress. Everything they build requires gold from your total stash to build, but they allow you to construct roads, which make it easier to move. They allow you to build watchtowers, which, if you were the last person to visit a certain watchtower, you control that watchtower, and the watchtower gives vision in a very large radius around it, as you would expect from a watchtower. And the fortresses that were showed briefly allow you to build something and then have the fortress collect income from the things around it. They can collect gold or mana or research. So I could build a fortress here and get the 10 gold from that and 10 gold from that per turn for the rest, for as long as I kept the fortress. I apologize for the brief interlude on settlers and builders. Generally, you want to build settlers if you see a really sweet spot. Like this has a lot of nice sites right around it, so I might want to build a settler and put it here, so that I get the starting X contains all these things. But you don't want to build too many of them. Builders, you generally only really want to have one. Sometimes you want to have it follow your army behind so that you can build roads where your army's going so that you can send reinforcements to it faster, but it does cost a lot of gold, so in the early game you are much better off building troops. Okay, so cities themselves have 4 different panels up here. They have their stats up in the top, and then they have these 4 different panels. This is your production tab, like your production queue, what you are going to be building, and cities all have happiness. Now, you have, in the first tab, produce units. These are all of the units you can build. They all do different things. You can mouse over them to get the quick stats, or you can right-click on them to get the full stats of the unit and the full description. Like I talked about in the unit description, you can read all about them right here. So these are the different kinds of units you can build. Right now I can build longbowmen, swordmen, initiates, builders, rams, settlers, and trebuchets. The next thing you can do is build base facilities. Now, there are a whole bunch of different base facilities here, but for the most part, you can upgrade its production, upgrade what kinds of units it can build. So everything can... Barracks, without a barracks, which is a very basic kind of building, you can only build one kind of unit. And if you build a barracks, then you get access to 2 new kinds of units that are also level tier 1, the lowest tier. War halls allow you to build pikemen and cavalry, which tend to be tier 2, slightly higher tier. And then after that, you can build your racial structure, which allows you to build tier 3 units, which is the highest tier that most cities can build before you get lots of research done. So, in the case of High Elves, you could build a Griffin Spire once you have a War Hall, and Griffin Spires allow you to build Griffin Riders, which are really good. If you mouse over each building, it'll give you a general idea of what kind of benefits it gives to your city. So if I build a shooting grounds, then my archers that I build out of the city start at a higher rank, which means that they are better. So if I'm like, okay, I want to build, this city's going to want to build a lot of archers, I might want to build a shooting grounds before I do build a bunch of archers. Storehouses are worth noting because they grow your population faster, but they're generally only worth building if you're getting a very small city that you think you're going to have a long time. Otherwise, you want to just keep rushing out units so that you can continue your domination of the map. And Builders Hall, Siege Workshops, and Masters Guild all increase your ability to build war machines, and they also increase your production per turn. So if you aren't building quite enough per turn, you might want to think about building one of those. One thing I have to note between this game and Alpha Centauri is you do not want to be building as many base facilities as you do in Alpha Centauri. In Alpha Centauri, you're generally building base facilities unless you need your units for a very specific reason, like building colony pods and formers and garrisons. In Age of Wonders, you want to be building a lot more units so that you can continue expanding, because in this game, expanding by conquest is what you do, whereas Alpha Centauri, you expand by peace, for the most part. There are a lot of buildings with special abilities that you can get for various reasons. All of them, just mouse over them and they'll tell you what they do. You'll notice the 1 turn or 3 turn or 2 turn symbol, turn being the hourglass. This is how long it'll take you to build them. Everything takes a amount of production to complete based on how much it costs. So this storehouse costs 100 gold, so it also costs 100 production to build. Since I generate 75 production per turn, that means that 75, not quite enough to do it in 1 turn, but enough to do it in 2. Production does not spill over into following turns. So if you are going to... If I build this, I will spend 75 production to get 3/4 of the way there, and then I will spend 75 production on it again to finish it up, and the 50 production extra that I had will be wasted. That's life, if you want to build a lot of things. But it's nice to be able to build like a unit that is just perfectly using as your production capacity out of that town as efficiently as possible. Some things can cost mana as well as gold, but most things, everything costs gold. Some things also cost mana. Additional things. If you do not want to produce any units or structures at a town, you can have it do one of these 4 actions. You start only being able to do merchandise and housing, but if your city generates mana or generates knowledge, has the right structures to do that, you can unlock those as well. When you select one of these, it has no cost, and it increases one aspect of that the income of one aspect of that city by 50%. So I could have this city seek knowledge, which would increase its research output by 50% each turn, because it is doing nothing else, and that would give me plus 13 knowledge per turn. You can do these as much as you want. Generally, you will want to be doing stuff with your cities as long as you have money, and then once you're starting to run low on money, your lesser used cities will just be used to produce merchandise or something, so that your better cities can keep cranking out good units, or things like that. Eventually, you're going to need to have to use these because you can't afford to build other stuff, but you don't always want to be doing that. In this option, this city options tab, you see ways to fundamentally change the way the city is. So you can plunder it or raise it. Plunder, you get a bunch of stuff and destroy all the things in the building, in the city, and then you destroy the city so that no one can hold it. If a city is razed or plundered, then it becomes a ruin, and to use that city again, someone has to go and spend a settler to build in the ruins of the city, at which point they get back some of what the city used to have, but not all of it. You can also release them as vassal, in which case they basically become very friendly NPCs that give you tribute. Generally, it's fine to release things as vassals, but you want to keep a decent amount of cities. I haven't actually played with vassals very much because they were recently added, so can't give you too much insight there. This last tab is the existing upgrades. It shows that what we have built in the city. So we can see that it is the throne city, we can see that it's a high elf city, and then we can see all of these other structures that have been built. We have a wall, a builder's hall, a barracks, a shrine, a siege workshop, etc. The last thing worth noting is happiness and how it works in cities. If we mouse up to the happiness thing, it tells us how happy our city is, and it'll tell us what is making it happy. Base happiness is the happiness of your empire, and a lot of different things affect that. If you are doing good things for a certain race, then you'll have racial happiness, and then that only applies to cities of that kind of race. And then there are other city happiness modifiers, like liked and disliked terrain. So for high elves, they like dense vegetation, dislike tropical and subterranean, and hate blighted and volcanic terrain. Well, we don't have any of the things that they dislike or hate, making our happiness lower, but we do have all these forests here, which are dense vegetation, so they like that, and therefore they're happier. The happier your city is, the more bonus income that it gives you. So we can see it gives us plus 15% income from happiness in every category that we produce, which is really nice. So that's the scoop on cities, domain, and in Age of Wonders, similar to Alpha Centauri, you generate research and can use that research to research new skills and abilities and technologies, if you will. You generate research each turn depending on what cities you have and what they have within their borders. For example, this city, as we mentioned back here, generates 26 knowledge. Okay, what is knowledge? Well, knowledge is our ability to research new skills. Now, if you go to this thing right here in the bottom left, you open up your research book. You can only have 12 different options at a time. You start with a bit less, but you can go up to 12 at once. 12 things that you can choose from to research, and each of them has a research cost. So to research basic seafaring, it will take me 60 knowledge, which means 2 turns of researching, because I'm generating 46 per turn at the moment. Or I could research summon wild animal or beast mastery for other things. These are all the different skills you can do. There are some passive skills. For example, beast mastery is an empire upgrade, which means that once I research it, it just helps everything in my empire, everything that I have, everywhere. And this one says all of the caster's animal and monster units get mind control immunity and +2 resistance, which is really nice. So this is a pretty powerful empire upgrade that is only available to Archdruids, because it says class Archdruid tier 3. Most of your research is dictated by what class you are. So druids can research the same kind of things as druids, sorcerers research the same kind of things as sorcerers, necromancers research necromancer research. There are some shared things, which are the different subclasses that are shared between each person, and each person gets 3 subclasses. For the most part, you don't need to know all that much about subclasses when you're just learning the game, but once you want to know more and have master the basics, you'll want to figure out what the difference between a creation adept and a fire adept is. So, this thing right here that we see, the summon wild animal, is a strategic spell. So, strategic spells, there are empire upgrades, strategic spells, and combat spells. Strategic spells are spells that we cast on the world map that have a world map effect. Empire upgrades upgrade our entire empire, our passive bonuses that we unlock for the rest of the game. Combat spells, like Bless right here, is a much smaller spell only used in combat, kind of a combat trick that helps one thing in a battle. So for example, Bless, it blesses a friendly unit. Blessed units have a bunch of bonuses, and it costs less mana and casting points. Combat spells are things that we cast in battles for minor buffs. Think of them as combat tricks in Magic, whereas Empire upgrades are more enchantments that can't be destroyed. Strategic spells are you cast them on the world map, and sometimes they have an ongoing cost, and sometimes they're a one-shot thing, but they do good stuff for you. So for example, Summon Wild Animal If you research it and cast it, then you will summon a new wild animal under your control where you cast it and have it until that animal dies. And it's basically creating a new unit without having to go through a town. So that is generally how research goes. When you research something, you will unlock new research, and it will tend to be a randomized set of things of the available stuff. You need to research more. The higher level researches will tend to not crop up inside of your possible research log until you have done more of the lower level researches, even if they don't have strict prerequisites. What I'm saying is there is generally not a research tree, but you have to get a lot of the lower level skills before the higher level skills will start showing up in your spellbook. The strict mechanics of it are unknown to me, so I am not sure about that. There is some exceptions. There are not trees, but there are lines. The seafaring line, you research seafaring, and then you can get advanced seafaring, and then you can get another kind of exploration-focused things. These are things focused on moving around the map. Druidry or warfare or something like that, with a numeral about it, increases your casting points, which basically every class has a research which increases their casting points, which allows them to cast more spells per turn. The last thing, so they'll always show up in your spellbook in this order as well. The top left is going to be your seafaring tree, then next to it is going to be your increased casting points tree, and then here is always going to be your last line, which is the unit creation line. So each class has a bunch of class-specific units that only they can produce or create. Sometimes these are researches that unlock it so that you can build those units at your cities, and sometimes the researches are spells that you can cast, so you research a summon spell. They aren't always the same. So for example, if I research Summon Wild Animal, it unlocks Produce Hunter. These are both generally new kinds of unit spells. And this chain goes from all the way at really weak Wild Animal tier spells to your most powerful unit, your tier 4 class unit, which in the case of Archdruids is the Horned God. So I'm thinking, so if you right click on any of the things in here, it's going to take you to your Tome of Wonders, the thing that shows you basically the data links. And it will give me a summary on this skill, and it says unlock research Produce Hunter. And if I click on that, it should take me to, okay, what does Produce Hunter do? And then it'll unlock Summon Eldritch Animal, and then that unlocks Produce Shaman, and then it unlocks Produce Gargantuan Animal, and then it unlocks Summon Horned God. So you can see how it's not really a tree so much as a line, where it lets you unlock more and more powerful units. So this line of research and this line of research are very, very powerful, and everyone is going to want to start researching some of them during their game. The later ones cost tons of research, so it might take you a long time to research them, but more powerful unit types are really good. Moving into the casting of spells, strategic spells are cast by going to the cast spell thing here. This shows you all of the global spells, the strategic spells that you know and are able to use. So you will see a mana cost and this whitish star with a number of turns next to it. The mana cost is how much mana it will cost you to cast that spell. The number of turns is the number of turns it will take you to be able to cast that spell. So if you mouse over this, it says 50 mana, 50 casting points, 2 turns. So if you click on it, it uses up 50 of your mana right at the start. I'm going to abort this briefly. When it says casting points, well, for each mana you spend, you need to spend a casting point to make it able to be cast. You add the number of casting points that you have in your empire up So I have 20 casting points in my Empire. I add 20 per turn to this, up until the point at which I can cast it. And once you've dumped all of your casting points into it, you can fire it off whenever you want. You don't have to cast it immediately as soon as it's ready, but until you cast it, you're not going to be able to start charging up any other spells. If you decide you don't want to cast something, so as I said here, I looked at this and I can say abort. The more turns you've let it sit there, the higher percentage of the mana cost that you'll lose when you try to abort it. So this spell took me 50 mana. If I waited until it was ready to cast and then aborted it, I would lose all 50 of that mana. Since I haven't put anything into it yet, I can abort it with no problem. What the spells actually do is highly dependent on the spells themselves. For example, Fertile Domain increases the growth of a city. So cities grow faster, which is pretty nice. So this is a spell I'd probably want to cast on one of my cities, and that enchants the city. Now you'll note it says 20 mana per turn. 20 mana per turn means that as long as I have this spell active, it's draining my mana resources. So it will give me a minus 20 mana income. So if you have too many spells active, you're actually going to be losing mana per turn instead of gaining it. This is somewhat alright because it means you've got a bunch of powerful things helping you on the map, but you're going to have to want to pick up a bunch of mana before all of your spells fall off and stop doing things. You can find mana and gold in chests and stuff on the world map. For example, this right here is a pile of mana crystals. So if I went there, I would get a bunch of bonus mana. Seek Inspiration is an interesting spell that everyone starts with. It will reset the researches that you are able to do. You'll always be able to research your 3 main trees, but everything else will be re-randomized, which means you will end up with some of the same things, but a lot of new things available. So these are strategic spells. The next set of spells we have are combat skill spells, but I'll get into those in the upcoming segment on combat. The last facet of Age of Wonders 3 that needs to be discussed is combat. So combat in this game is quite complex and probably the most easy part of the game to make mistakes in, but this also makes it really rewarding when you execute combats well and when things go properly. There's a lot of depth to it, there's a lot of things to do and things to know, but it does end up being quite interesting. So, to start a combat, you move one of your armies onto an opponent's army, and then you are able to begin the combat. When you attack one army, it will pull all of the units in the nearby hexes into that attack. So, if I was going to attack here, it would pull these 6 hexes into the combat. And you can see it will show you your armies are here and their army is here, this being the center hex and these being the surrounding hex. If you're just doing one army against one army, it will look slightly differently. It will look more like so. But there is purpose because where your armies are relative to their thing is also where they show up on the combat map. So if you start like this, as opposed to all in one stack, your army will be split up, for better or for worse. It'll also tell you what the computer expects your probability of victory is, and it will let you decide to auto-combat and just let the computer, basically, computer run the combat by itself. If you want to auto-combat, I typically only recommend it for fights you know you're going to win or don't really care about, because it's generally, you will generally be able to do better than the computer, and if you're not, then you generally want the practice. I recommend auto-combat more for when the game is starting to drag out really long and you have just massive armies. You don't need to have, auto-combat. You don't need to manually combat it when you have several dragons against a couple random guys. It's a bit excessive. If you decide, wait a second, I don't like its projected victory, you can abort the attack by pressing this button. You can also look at the stats of any unit
that is in the fight by clicking on its picture. Just left click and it'll tell you what they do. So really, you can get all of the information you need to before you start the combat. So let's hop into it. I think an adequate parallel for combats in this game is that they're somewhat like combats in Dungeons and Dragons. You have several different units. Each unit has its own set of abilities that it can use, and its statistics, and its attack power and defensive power. And they all have some amount of special abilities. And there are attacks of opportunity and flanking bonuses that you can take advantage of. So when I click on a unit, I can see highlighted are all of these squares that I can get to, or hexes that I can get to. Green, yellow, and orange represent how much movement it will have left upon reaching those squares. For the most part, this means that if you're going to do attacks, you will get to do 3 attacks if you are on green areas, 2 attacks if you are on yellow areas, and the orange ones you will only get to do 1 attack. So, to approach this combat, I'm going to try to get all of my guys together so that I can present a unified front, and generally to strike with overwhelming force is more efficient than getting picked off one at a time. So I will move my units together and pass the turn. Every time you click this button here, it ends your turn, and then all of your opponent's units get to move. You can also cast spells with your leader, toggle auto combat to let the computer do the rest of it for you, and surrender if for some reason you want to surrender. If you surrender, all of your guys die instantly. The main reason you would want to surrender is so that your opponent doesn't get experience for killing any of your stuff if you think that they're going to kill it and you're not going to get anything useful out of it, like not kill anything, not get any damage in. So surrender if you've got like a lone scout getting picked off by a giant army. Retreating can only be done by the attacker. The defender cannot retreat. The defender's units are stuck in combat until the attacker is either dead or retreats. And for the attacker to retreat, they simply need to move any unit onto one of the several purple back arrow squares that are here, or over here, or over here. These are the spots that if you move any of your units, it instantly retreats from the combat safely. So I could retreat just my Unicorn Riders and leave everything else in the combat, or I could have everything run over there as fast as they can and try to have everything retreat. The other condition at which combat ends, aside from either side being eliminated, is if no damage has been dealt for a certain number of turns. So now you see that the computer has decided to go attack me. They moved, shot my cavalry, and then moved their archers up and shot my guys. So there are generally several types of units. There's infantry, which are pretty good against pikemen and kind of okay against everything else. You have pikemen, which are exceptionally good against cavalry. You have cavalry, which are really good at closing in against archers very fast so that the archers don't keep doing huge amounts of damage at long range. Generally, archers are really weak at close range. And you have archers, which are generally good at long range. In addition to that, you will occasionally have special units like large monsters or heroes or siege weapons that have their own kind of unique aspect on the fight. You also have low-level units called irregulars, which are kind of like a mix between archer and melee guys. They have typically one small shot at long range, but it's not quite as good as a regular long-range archer, but they also can do a little bit in a combat. So these high elf initiates that I have are irregulars. So I could either decide to shoot the enemy, or I could decide to run up and melee attack it. So when you mouse over with an attack, you'll see how much damage you're doing. In this case, I will do to 3 to 5 shock damage. And the reason I do that is because I have a 40% shock protection penalty because my opponent has shock resistance, and a 50% range penalty. If I was to go a little bit closer, like here, you note I do 6 to 10 because I'm now at much shorter range, so I don't have the range penalty. If I look at the ability in question I'm using, it's called Lightning Shock. It shoots a single bolt at the enemy target unit. It has a range of medium. It has a line of sight penalty because it's a straight shot, so if things are in the way, like if I was here and there's something here, then I would get damage penalties because there's things in the way. And it does less damage at long range. Cannot be used while unit is engaged, means that if there's an enemy right next to me beating in my face, I can't shoot. Melee strike is a general melee attack, and defensive stance is very important. I'll get into it in a second. But for the moment, I think I'm just going to get to here and then fire off a lightning shock. So you see I did 9 damage here. Now, with these swordsmen, I think what I want to do is I want to go up to here, and I will put these guys in defensive stance. So, defensive stance has a couple purposes. Defensive stance, when you activate it, will increase your defense and resistance. Defense and resistance, as I mentioned in the unit description part, is how much damage reduction you have in combat. So if I go into defensive stance, I will take less damage from the High Elf Initiates attacking me and the High Elf Swordsmen attacking me. So for example, if you click on your opponent's units, by the way, and then mouse over your own, you'll see what they're able to do on their next turn. So I'm currently selecting the enemy's High Elf Initiate, and right now it can move to all of these different places, and it could potentially attack me for 1 to 2 physical damage and 4 to 6 lightning damage 3 times. Now, if I put these guys in defensive stance, and then I compare it again, because their resistance has gone up, now they're taking 1 to 2 physical damage and 2 to 4 lightning damage, which is significantly lower. The other benefit of defensive stance is that while you are in defensive stance, you cannot be flanked by anything. Flanking is when you'll notice that each unit has a certain way it's facing, right? So this unit right here is facing forward to here, behind it is here, and these are its flanks. If you are attacking from the forward arc of a unit, you do not get flanking bonuses, but if you are attacking from the rear arc of the unit, you'll get a fairly hefty damage bonus to each kind of damage you do, and you will also not be retaliated against for the first strike that you do if you're doing in melee. So what does this mean? Well, it means that if I am doing multiple kinds of damage, like these High Elf Initiates attack for physical and lightning, if they flank someone and attack them, they will get bonus, I believe it's +1 physical damage and +1 lightning damage. If they did only physical damage, they would only get +1 physical damage, because it's a +1 to each different type of damage they do. So if you do a lot of different damage types, it's really good to be flanking. So that's a primer on flanking. Flanking is the largest part of successfully executing combats. If you are flanking, your combat will go well. If you do not do any flanking, your combat will not do quite as well. Flanking is critically important in a lot of situations. I think I'm going to have these guys shoot over here. Now, I will attempt to demonstrate. Yeah. So, special abilities. I've mentioned the archery abilities, like Lightning Shock or Shoot Longbow. I've mentioned do melee attacks. Melee attacks are fairly straightforward, but some units that are not heroes will have special abilities. Like the High Elf Unicorn Riders have this special ability called Phase. Now it says what it does here, it teleports it. It has a long range, it requires 3 action points, and it can only be used once per battle. So, I've moved a small amount. You'll note action points are the color of which thing. I mentioned you'll do one attack if you're in green, or 3 attacks if you're in green, 2 attacks if you're in yellow, and 1 attack if you're in orange. That's because that's how many action points you have left. This requiring 3 action points means that it will reduce you down to no actions left when you teleport. So I teleport here and I have no movement left. However, it's not quite done. It lets me do one more thing, be it either defend or attack. So in this case, I can either defend or I can attack. Since this thing was not in defensive stance, which meant that it was immune to flanking, and it fired forward, it is now facing forward. I just teleported behind it, so now I'm in its rear arc. You'll note that it says flanking here, and I also have armor piercing. Armor piercing is one of these abilities that I have, which says +2 damage to armored units, and because these high elf longbowmen are armored, I do +2 damage to them. So I can attack these guys for 14 to 22 damage, which I will do, and I do 16. Which could have been better, but it means that these archers are not really going to have a choice on their next turn except to do melee strikes on my unicorn riders, which I'm not really scared of. These high elf initiates are also not really going to be able to do all that much except attack my high elf swordsman. What they could do is they could decide to move away and then shoot at something else, say here. So if they moved here and shot me, I would be getting flanked, and I would take so ranged attacks can flank. If you shoot me in the back, I will turn to face you, and I will take extra damage. So if these high elf initiates were to back up, they would take an attack of opportunity from these swordsmen. Attacks of opportunity happen when you are moving away, or if you are moving out of close combat range of an enemy unit, they will get an attack of opportunity, assuming that they're facing you properly. For example, if I was here and then went to here, it won't show you that. You'd see a red arrow. Actually, I'm going to show you that. So if I move here, if I try to move down here, you'll notice this red arrow where the initiates are attacking me. This means that anywhere I move right now, the initiates will get an attack of opportunity onto me because I'm moving away from them. Attacks of opportunity are automatically flanking, so you take a lot of damage if you let your opponents get attacks of opportunity on you. Generally not recommended. So because I didn't want to have these guys go and shoot my unicorn riders, I'm going to run up to them and hit them with my leader. So I hit them, they retaliated. Whenever you attack someone in melee, you hit them, and then they get to retaliate. If you attack someone in melee and you were flanking them, instead of them retaliating, they turn around to face you. If they retaliate, it uses up a small amount of their movement for the next turn. So now, since I hit these high elf initiates once and they retaliated, they have less movement to use on their next turn. So you can slow down a very large, very scary unit by forcing it to retaliate against less large and scary units, and if you do it properly, you can have them retaliate several times and then not have the movement to do anything else. Of course, this means that they are actually retaliating against you, but these are trade-offs that you can do. Since I decided to defend against these guys, I might decide not to defend. So if you hit defend, it'll show you as not having any movement left since you're defending, but you can cancel that choice. If you pass the turn while you haven't used all of your movement points, it will automatically defend for you. So if I was going to end the turn right now, this guy had movement points left, he would automatically defend. Typically, with very, very few exceptions, if you do an action that is like hit someone or shoot someone or cast a spell or anything like that, that will use the remainder of your movement points, and you will not be able to go into defensive stance. So if I had these swordsmen finish off the initiates, that would be good because the initiates would be dead. But then I would have faced here, which means that these swordsmen can go and flank my swordsmen, which isn't really something I want. Right now they can't get to anywhere else. They can't flank me anywhere else without going down to here, which means that I would get an attack of opportunity, since if they went to here, they'd have to go through this square hex. And since that's in my forward arc, I would get an attack of opportunity. The high health initiates, if they were going to move out anywhere, I would get an attack of opportunity on them, so I don't need to worry about that. So the best thing I can do right now with these guys is go into defensive stance. Now I end the turn, and what do they decide to do? Okay, so here's what you saw here. The swordsman moved along here and took an attack of opportunity from my swordsmen in order to get a flanking attack on my leader. Then their initiates decided for some unknown reason to attack my swordsman. Had they attacked my leader would have taken lots of bonus damage, and I would be at much lower health on it. Then the archers decided to hit the Unicorn Rider, because otherwise they would just die. So, you have to be warned, because if you have high priority units that are not particularly tanky, like leaders or heroes at low levels, then your opponent will occasionally take attacks of opportunity and otherwise extra damage to hurt your leader. So, if I was playing a little bit riskier here, my opponent had a little bit more stuff, I might have been in a sticky spot because he was able to go here, get an attack of opportunity that I wasn't able to kill him in response to, and then maybe done something with the initiate, maybe use something else. So, be warned about attacks of opportunity. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to run in and go here. Now, normally because I am doing melee combat, he'd get a chance to retaliate against me, but since I'm in the orange, I'm only going to do one attack. When I do one attack and I'm flanking them, they will turn around to face me, but I would have to do a second attack to cause them to retaliate, because them turning around is their response to the first attack, because it's a flanking attack. So I will do that now, and I do 17 damage. Now they're turned around. Now, since they're no longer flanking my leader, I can either attack them, flanking them, or I can back up. Since I'm no longer in their forward arc where they are threatening, I can back up my leader, and then I can do something else, like shoot them from the rear because I have archery. And now I will shoot them. And there we go. We had a combat, we took a small amount of damage, but it was generally successful, and we won the combat. Now, I will go ahead and do a second combat to show another perspective. This is against 3 Sun Guards, which are fairly good pikemen from the Tigran race. So, what do I know about these guys? Well, they're all pikemen, so they've got no ranged attacks. So since I have the range advantage, I want to set it up so that he has to come to me in a unfavorable situation where I can be defensive and take advantage of it, because I don't want to run at him and charge him when he's a bunch of pikemen. Now, these are actually fairly scary pikemen, so I'm not sure how well this combat's going to go for me. So I see here he can move up to here. You can attack people just outside of your maximum movement, so he can move up to here, but he can attack, since he can move here, he can attack there. Let's see. How do I want to go about doing this? The first thing I know I want to do is I want to... These guys get 5 movement. Now, if I go here, and then defend, then he's not going to he's not going to be able to kill these guys that quickly. Which means I can go here and hide behind, have both of my guys hiding behind this swordsman in the bottleneck to prevent me from taking a whole bunch of damage. Then I can move this over here to safety, but close enough that it can respond to other things. And I can, with this guy, I think I just want to move it down to here so it can't get attacked. Then I will do a ranged attack with this guy. If you are adjacent to your own units, so in this combat you would normally think that I have, since I'm shooting through my own guys, I have an interference penalty. This is true unless you are immediately adjacent to your own guys, in which case they do not interfere with your shot. This is essentially actually kind of what they did in olden times. You have the front rank, and then you get the call for everybody in the front rank to duck, so that the people behind them can shoot over their heads without trouble. I think they used to do that in the American Revolution, if I'm recalling my history correctly. I could be totally wrong. I'm not a history guy, but I think that's true. Anyways, so these guys have shot. These guys are defending to hold the fort against the Tigran Sun Guards. These guys are hiding out so that they can respond to whatever they do next. And now it's just down to my leader. I can, since I moved so far, I can only fire off one shot with my longbow, or I could cast a spell. So when you cast a spell, only one of your guys, any hero or leader, can cast a spell per turn per combat. So if I had a leader that could cast spells and a hero that could cast spells, only one of them could cast a spell on a single given turn. So you can only cast one spell per turn. You can't just annihilate your enemy in a giant barrage of magic on turn one. In this case, I only know two spells. I know Revive Instinct, which makes all enemy mounts become feral mounts, which slows them down. Well, that's it's pretty useless against a bunch of guys on foot. Or I could do Stoning. Pelts a barrage of rocks at your enemy, deals 24 damage to target enemy unit. That sounds a lot better. So I can stone these Sun Guards and make them take a lot of damage. Sounds good. Alright, did some damage. You'll note, while the spell said that it did 24 damage, 24 damage, the range was more like 18 to 24. And this is because the defense of these guys resists a bit of damage from the stoning, but the stoning has, things don't always do a set amount of damage. They have their base amount of damage, and then it varies by a couple points in either direction. So I'm done with this turn. I'll end turn and see what they decide to do. Okay, so they attacked these guys into my swordsman here. That was good for me. Unfortunately, it used up all of my retaliation, so now these swordsmen are not able to actually do anything this turn. They moved in these Sun Guards to get in position on me here, and they moved up these Sun Guards over here. So now I'm not too worried about what these Sun Guards can do. At the most, they're probably going to get one attack off on my swordsman. And everything else is... These guys are... This is what I'm worried about right now. So I think what I want to do is... I know I want to get these in the fight, these initiates. I know I'm going to want to do something with the Unicorn Rider and something with my leader. I think what I'm going to do, so what I want to do at the moment is I want to spread out all of my I want to spread out all of my attacks so that he gets to he doesn't get to retaliate
too many times against any specific unit. So if I got 2 retaliations on the Unicorn Rider, that'd be bad because that does tons of damage. But if I only do 1, it'll be pretty safe. So I'm not actually all that worried about that. So I think I'm going to have this attack here. Okay, I don't actually know why he got to do 2 retaliations against me. I thought he would only be able to do 1. Oh, I understand. So, pikemen. Pikemen have the first strike. The unit attacks first when defending unless the attacking unit also has first strike. So they got to do first strike against me. Then I attack. Then, even though I'm not going to be able to get another attack off, he retaliates, and then it goes, aha, you were not able to get another attack off. It's as if he was attacking me. So that wasn't good. That got an initiative mine killed. But, sometimes these things happen when you overlook certain things. Now, I am going to attack here. So he's used 2 of his retaliations. He's not going to get more than 1. Or he's not going to get more than 1 more off now, since he doesn't have the action points to do it. So I'm going to charge him. And these are not really being the most efficient of attacks, but unfortunately, my units are actually just not very good against this thing. But now it has no movement left. This can't do anything. And on my next turn, I'm just going to be able to barrage it down with a wave of archery and magic and stuff like that. Now I will end turn. See, this guy moves in, does a few attacks. This didn't have any movement because I had used it all up, so it couldn't do anything. Oh, in case I didn't mention it, when you are casting these spells, it uses up your casting points. These casting points for your hero are part of a global supply that you get every turn, and right now, I just started the game, so I only start with 20 casting points per turn. Stoning costs 15 mana, which was another one of the strategic resources, so it cost me 15 of the mana that I had when I cast it, and also casts 15 casting points. So it used 15 of my casting points, putting me at 5, which meant that my leader is not able to cast any more spells in this combat or another combat. Now, leaders are special in that even if they're not in the combat, they can cast spells into the combat. However, if your leader is not present and they're casting spells across the entire world into another combat, it costs them twice as many casting points and twice as much mana. So if my leader wasn't in the combat, even with 20 casting points and a bunch of mana, I would not have been able to cast Stoning because it costs 30 casting points. If I did have 30 casting points, I'd be able to cast Stoning at a cost of 30 casting points and 30 mana. So now, I just want to shoot this guy, and archery is wonderful because people can't retaliate against it. This initiate's going to come in and shoot that, and then my Unicorn Rider is going to teleport to the other side of it. Now it's going to retaliate once, since this wasn't in guard stance, unlike all of the other times I attacked them. It's not going to be able to retaliate because I'm only attacking it once, and then it turns around to face me, so I attack it, it turns around, and now it, thankfully, bared its back to my other guy, which is able to get the last hit in and finish it off. So, hopefully that gave you a little bit of perspective on how combats in Age of Wonders 3 play out, the kind of things that you need to be aware, and they really just kind of scale up from here with more abilities and more units. And as you noticed with my initiate when it died, sometimes you're going to make oversights, and you'll try to figure out why, and hopefully you'll learn from your mistakes and get better with combat. It's a tricky thing, and realizing how to make it so that you are getting the best out of flanking your opponents and using up their abilities, and soaking their damage with the things that you can do it most efficiently with, and all that. It's a very interesting thing to do, and hopefully you can learn from that, and, you know,
Combats are tricky, but practice makes perfect, so the more combats you do, the better you'll learn it. And eventually you will be winning all your combats with little losses. So, hopefully you've enjoyed this primer to Age of Wonders 3, and that's it for basic game mechanics.